Okay, let's go over to the New England Patriots. And after the Dallas game, pretty big red flag. Like they might have some issues. After the Saints game, I'm sorry, it's over. You lose to Dennis Allen and Derek Carr like that at home. Like there's nothing more to say. Albert Breer had an article on the MMQB talking to executives that simply said their team is not very talented, which I don't need a GM or an assistant GM to tell me. We can all see, and I watched a decent amount of that game for at least the first quarter and a half, and it was over, and it was over fast. That team stinks. And here's a reality in New England. There is one grand poobah. He makes all the decisions from a coaching standpoint to a personnel standpoint. It's why so many guys I know throughout the league leave that place. Because when you work there as a scout, he doesn't care what you think. You're just accumulating information for him ultimately to make a decision. So when you look at this roster, this is a team, every single guy on that team is because of him. And that can't be said in every organization. Some GMs have juice. Some GMs, convince their coach to do stuff. That's not the case. And this team, especially once Judon and their rookie corner Gonzalez goes down, they're screwed. I mean, this is a 4-win team max. Mac Jones, I will never get off this ledge. A guy with those physical attributes and that talent never gets drafted at pick 15. And when he does, the Christian Ponder types, you immediately get boat raced. You're in major trouble. And when you look at Belichick, he's always drafted overachievers, guys that made other teams scratch their head. Cole Strange, remember a couple years ago, McVay and Les Snead laughed because they thought they didn't have any picks. They're like, we thought we could get that guy in the third round. Belichick just took him at the end of the first. So Bill, relative to some of his contemporaries, and we've talked about this before, Pete and Andy, the two other old guys who are successful, have GMs that they totally lean on to help them make personnel decisions. So you look at this Patriot team, their margin for error coming into the season, if they were going to go 9-8, was extremely small. But he's always drafted and make moves like this. He just used to have Tom Brady, and Tom Brady could help guys like Julian Edelman come out of nowhere. Right? You put Julian Edelman on this team, and I love Jules. I'm as big of a Julian Edelman fan as you're going to find. But if you put him on this squad, he'd look terrible. So when you look at the Jujus and the Devontae Parkers and those type Hunter Henrys, those guys could have had success with Tom Brady. So you remove Tom Brady from the equation. And I've never been one to be like, it's 80 Tom, 20 Belichick or 50-50, whatever. They were an unreal combo. You put those two guys together, they are boat racing the fucking NFL. I watched it my entire adult life, from the time I was in high school till a couple of years ago when Tom left to Tampa. It was remarkable. I've seen him play multiple times live. When I worked for the Eagles, they destroyed us. I've seen him countless other times. It was an operation. We all watched. Anyone listening to this watched those two guys operate together. It's why all the former players that played for Bill speak so highly of him. But a huge part of his operation, which helped him make draft choices that sometimes left other people scratching their head, was Tom. So you remove Tom, you got to pivot. You got to change your strategy. And he hasn't changed his strategy. So when you watch his team and they're struggling, it's not really that shocking because Mac Jones, who's a bottom 3 quarterback, and honestly, on any given drive, he looks like a complete scrub. You go, well, of course, these personnel moves are not going to work. Like, it's over. This team is terrible. There is no miracle work to be done. So at the end of the game, when Bill says we're going to start over, he has no answers. He has no other pitch. He does not have some Barry Zito curveball in his back pocket. There's nothing he can do. They're not very skilled on offense. Now they're missing key defensive players. And they just, I can't overstate this enough. To lose to Dennis Allen, who's proven to be a good defensive coordinator as a head coach, more than questionable, and Derek Carr, who Bill used to kick his ass. Derek's been there multiple times in New England, and it has not gone well. To get humiliated like that at home, to me, it's one thing when it's the Dallas Cowboys, who, if they get a little lead on you, that defense, whatever, they overwhelmed you, scores on defense. The New Orleans Saints, now New Orleans might be a 10-win team, but still, Dennis Allen and Derek Carr, any New England fan listening to this right now knows that's way lower than it was the previous week. And that felt like it's going to get uglier because that's the way bad teams' seasons goes. Like as the season goes, you just lose and get your ass kicked and your ass kicked. That felt like the nail in the coffin of like, this season's going to be a joke. And I think the other angle of this is, listen, it's a conversation. He's 71, 72 years old. They're going to need another quarterback. And if they continue to suck, and I always thought he was too good of a coach. He was like recession proof. You know, they say like alcohol, recession proof. Recession, people drink more. Times are good, people are boozing, right? Never, it does not matter the economic times. Alcohol moves off the shelves. I thought the same thing was about Bill. You could give him just a trash roster, and he'd still find a way to go 7-10. Well, this roster is so bad, and his quarterback is so shitty right now, they might be a 4-13 team. And if you're a 4-13 team, you're going to be in the mix for all these top quarterbacks. You might not get Caleb, but the Drake Mays, the Michael Penix, I've said this over and over. Bill hung his hat, and rightfully so, on being cutthroat, on being emotionless, on making decisions that left other people shaking their head, but he didn't view football. He wasn't emotionally connected, right? He could trade from Richard Seymour's to Logan Mankins. He could do anything. Hell, he tried to trade Rob Gronkowski. And Rob's like, I'm going to retire if you send me to Detroit. He does not care. Robert Kraft is going to eventually have to take that tactic. And to me, it starts with, how do you trust this guy to draft your next quarterback? One, just his age. He's not going to be there forever. And two, like, listen, we've been talking about this for a while, and I find it fascinating because he's going to go down as one of the greatest coaches of all time. Divorces get ugly. They just do. But divorces don't always have to be like, sometimes it's just time, right? There's not one individual instance, right? Like Bill let Tom go, and then Tom won a Super Bowl. It's not like Robert fired him then. Now, there are lingering things that lead to resentment. You're paying a guy $20 million, and there's no hope in the near future. That I think it's pretty clear. Like, a divorce is inevitable. Now, I'm not going to act like I know Robert Kraft and those guys are going to fire him at the end of the year. But I've said over and over, a guy of Bill's age, a guy's now that has Bill's wealth, and a guy with Bill's resume doesn't typically just go, you know what, guys? I can't figure this out. I got no answers. So you know what I'm going to do for the betterment of the franchise? I'm going to step away. I'm going to say, hey, someone else take this. I can no longer do the job. Usually not how it works. Now the 71, 72-year-old, super rich, huge ego, super belief in himself, and rightfully so. The only way to have a divorce in this situation is essentially fire him. Now, they might not report it like that. It may be reported mutual breakup. But if Bill Belichick is not the coach in 24, it will be because he's fired. Told his services are no longer needed. And let's face it, like, it's over. Like, we just have to admit it. It's over. And that's okay. Everything good comes to an end. Everything. Especially in the coaching profession. You can't just coach in the NFL, especially as you get into your 70s, in just forever, and expect success to just sustain, right? The Packers are a good example. They had success over a 30-year period with, I'm recording this part before the Monday night game, with Favre and then Rodgers, but they went through multiple general managers. They went through multiple head coaches. It's like, yeah, like sometimes change is very healthy. Anyone listening to this knows that when they've made professional changes in their life, whether you've been forced, whether you've been laid off, whether you've been fired, whether you just actively leave for a new job, whether you start your own company, it's invigorating. It creates a sense of emotion that you don't get when you're just kind of, I don't want to say Belichick's in the slow lane, but like it's kind of stagnant there. And it's more than stagnant because they suck. So I think one thing's clear. Roster stinks. We all can acknowledge that. But like, is Bill the guy for the future? No. So let's just call a spade a spade. Probably his last season in New England. Here's something every football fan should know. You can get anything you need for game day delivered with Uber Eats. Well, almost anything, because You can't get your dream running back for your fantasy team delivered with Uber Eats, but they will deliver get flapjacks, tacos, and six-packs. Great pass protection? No. Great pizza selection? Yes. Championship defense? No. Deodorant? Yes. Turnovers? No. Turnovers the pastry? Yes. Because that's groceries. And get those delivered with Uber Eats too. And food from your favorite restaurants. And other essentials. So this season, get anything. Well, almost anything for game day by ordering on the Uber Eats app. Uber Eats, official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details. One thing I noticed yesterday, I was watching, I bet on the Steeler game. And if you listen to Stuckey segment, you just hammer Tomlin as a home dog. And the majority of these Raven Steeler games under the Tomlin Harbaugh regimes, when they've played each other, it's a staggering amount of games that have come down to under a field goal. So the Steelers were getting 4 points. Now, when you're watching that game, it felt like for a split second it was going to be 20-3 and the Steelers were in major trouble. Now, sometimes winning band-aids your issues. Like the Steelers won, I don't think they're good. But one takeaway I do have, I was wrong thinking they could compete to be the number 1 seed. They have no chance to win 13, 14 games. But they do have a chance to win 9-ish games. I would say 10 would be their ceiling, probably 8's their floor. Given, and this is the biggest difference between the Patriots. I was watching 3 teams Sunday morning pretty closely. The Giants, they're awful. The Patriots are worse. The Steelers were playing like those teams, but they ultimately now have pulled 2 games out of their ass. Why? Because unlike those 2 teams, they have elite players. TJ Watt is one of the best players in the National Football League. Hightower is an unreal second rusher. Pickens, dude has a chance to be a high-end wide receiver. Joey Porter's son, Joey Porter Jr., had a fantastic interception. Clearly, high hopes for him. Minkah Fitzpatrick. The Steelers, offensively, major issues. Najee Harris, not very good. If they'd like a redo on that pick, hell, they would like ETN over him if they could redo it. But when you look at the Steelers, the difference between those 2 teams that are probably headed toward 4 or 5 wins and the Steelers, you're going to look up, be like, their offense was terrible. And they went 9-8. Tomlin still doesn't lose because of personnel. And this is where the NFL, more than college, is about the X's and the O's. In college, it skews Jimmys and the Joes. If you have elite players, you can be average at the X's and O's and still win 11 games. Look at James Franklin's career, right? Now, if you have the X's and O's and the Jimmys and the Joes, you can win national championships. Nick Saban, Urban Meyer, Kirby Smart. In football, in the NFL, a lot of teams have high-end players. Obviously, the Niners, the Eagles, some have more than others. But there is a large group of teams that have impact players at several positions. So it's a scheme game. And the Steelers offensively clearly lack some innovation. Matt Canada, people aren't just randomly making fun of the guy, randomly calling for the guy's job. Look at his resume as an offensive play caller. It's not very good. And Kenny Pickett, to me, the difference between him and Mac Jones, now Kenny is slightly better athlete, but I think they're of the same, like if they were on the quarterback tree, they would be from the same tree, right? They're not Josh Allen, Mahomes, some of those guys are down the road. But Kenny Pickett, pretty good athlete, and hits a couple big plays, which he's done this season. And I will say this about him. And I had Cam Hayward on in the summer, and one thing he mentioned is last year down the stretch when they turned around their season, he played well, specifically at the end of games. And I gave last week, what was it, the Thursday night game, Justin Fields a lot of credit because it was not going well. It was ugly. It couldn't have gone much worse. Yet mentally, he did not fold. He did not just say, you know what, screw it. This season's going to be a disaster. My career in Chicago's over. Fuck it. I don't care anymore. He just kept swinging. And now thinking about the Thursday night game, did I overrate his game a little bit? A lot of it was after the catch. Maybe a little bit from a statistical standpoint, but from a mental standpoint, brought a lot to the table. Did not tap out. And in the NFL at the highest level, in pro sports in general, hell, in life, it's easy to kind of mentally fold. And I think Kenny Pickett does have a little mental toughness to him, because that was a game where he easily could have just waved the white flag. Like, this ain't going to work. I'm screwed. And he made a huge, huge throw to essentially win them the game, to, their star wide receiver. But listen, the Steelers just won't die because of personnel. And I think that speaks to the organization. Like, Mike Tomlin ain't drafting the players. I'm not saying he doesn't influence the draft picks, but it's a group effort. It's always led by Kevin Colbert, the Rooneys. It's an organizational philosophy where when you look at the Patriots, it's Bill. And if Bill doesn't like him, nope, not going to take him. It's like, sometimes it is healthy to get some outside opinions, to not just have your views as the only thing that is taken into account when making a decision. And I think that shows in Pittsburgh, because they shouldn't be that good. They honestly, the way they're playing, especially offensively in 2023, should probably be like a 7-win team. But you're going to look up and they're going to win 9. And the difference is elite guys. Listen, Lions are for real. They just are. There is no disputing it. They are a 12-plus win team. Now, part of that is the schedule, but their last 15 games, they're 12-3. And they have high-end players all over the place. And everybody under the sun, and I probably was a little guilty of this, though, football, this isn't Wall Street. There's a little meathead into a lot of coaches. Dan Campbell might be pretty good. Like, you watch the Lions, they consistently start fast. They consistently show up ready to play. They take on his personality of a very, very physical football team. They've been built in the correct way at the point of attack. Their offensive line, high-end, top-notch. Aiden Hutchinson, you think Trent Baalke would like that pick back? You know what's crazy? Now, listen, did he fall in the draft? He went to, but he was also drafted over a guy who was a huge projection. Because sometimes, and I'm guilty of this, that we undervalue not elite athletes. We go, how high is their ceiling? Well, actually, Aiden Hutchinson's is pretty freaking high. Why? He's 6'7". He's a badass. He's highly skilled. The interception he made yesterday was just elite. I really like this Lions team. And there's a chance they're better than the Cowboys. At worst, they're just as good. Because, let's face it, Dak Prescott and Jared Goff's been better the last 2 years. It's not an opinion. That's a fact. And when you look at the Detroit Lions, there's like an aura of, this is fun. There's pressure because a lot of people are picking them to make the playoffs. They should make the playoffs. But there's not like this aura for a historically bad franchise of negativity surrounding them. Right? Like, when you look at the Dallas Cowboys, the first thing that goes wrong, there's this negative cloud. And that's part of being the Cowboys, the Lakers, the Yankees, the big dog in town, right? Tiger Woods in his prime, bogeys a couple holes. It's viewed at a lot differently than other people. It's part of the brand of the Cowboys. But if we take away the brands and all the bullshit and just look at the talent on the field, if you got the Niners and the Eagles as the top 2 teams in the NFC, clearly, are we sure Detroit isn't the third? And are we sure Detroit isn't whoever ends up, depending on how the seeding goes? I'd rather play the Cowboys in the second round than Detroit Lions. I'm not saying the Lions have like a really good shot to be in the NFC Championship or even win the Super Bowl, but I do think they're for real because they're built the correct way. In a day and age where physicality has been taken out of the game in space, and rightfully so for the health, though I'm never apologizing. I miss the violence. I grew up on the violence. I'm a consumer first, and I loved watching it. Whenever on my Instagram feeds or whatever, videos from the 90s, the 80s, the 2000s, it's like I like that level of football. I watched just as much football then as I do now. Maybe a little less. I have more options because of YouTube TV, but I watched a lot of football then, and I fucking loved it. But the one area where you're still allowed to be extremely physical, and it's treated somewhat, obviously you can't hit the quarterback the same way, but in terms of offensive and defensive linemen against each other, it's not much difference than it was 15, 20, 30 years ago, is the point of attack. Your D tackles, your D ends, your guards, your centers, your tackles, and the Lions are good there. So the Lions for sure are not going away. And last but not least, you know what's funny is forever there was this argument about guys that got fired, giving them a second chance. Like second chance coaches had a really good chance of success. They're like, look at Belichick. Failed in Cleveland, then went to New England. Andy Reid in Kansas City. Maybe they're just really good. Like maybe they're just all-time great coaches. Because like Pat Shurmur got a second chance. How'd that go? McCarthy's getting a second chance. Like clearly probably going to be a little more underwhelming than the hype. Now, he's better than all these second chance guys because you look at Frank Reich and you go, are we sure he knows what he's doing? Are we sure Frank has any clue what he's doing to be a guy worthy of immediately getting hired? It wasn't Sean Payton, won a Super Bowl, been in the playoffs a bunch. Frank was in Indy and got dealt a bad hand, though he inherited the Josh McDaniels mess. But the luck retiring on him, totally understand. But I'd say the last couple of years, just watching his team, which pretty talented, I wouldn't say they're Niners or Eagles, but they definitely weren't as shitty as they showed. Hell, look at this season. Who would you rather have right now coaching your team? If all things were equal, I get two teams, exact same personnel. Shane Steichen or Frank Reich. Shane's literally coached 5 games in his career, and I don't think there's one person in the National Football League, not a GM, not an owner, and definitely not a defensive coordinator that wouldn't want to be with Shane. And I think Frank sometimes, like ultimately, for example, Doug Peterson, the dude won a freaking Super Bowl. Then his second year gets him back to the playoffs when Carson gets banged up again, wins a game with Foles. So you look at Frank, you go, what did he actually do? Same thing, played in the NFL, big, looks the part, nice guy. People really, really like the guy. Are we sure he should be a head coach right now in the NFL? Because I watch his team, and listen, you go, well, John, you thought they should trade up to get Bryce Young or should take Bryce Young number 1. Yeah, I'm in the podcast business. They are paid to make that decision and get it right. I'm not. Whether I'm wrong, like I'm paid to entertain and push advertisements. That's my industry. If you're Frank, you are paid to get the right fucking quarterback and then coach him up and make him look good and figure it out. That's why you're paid millions of dollars. And right now I'll watch Frank and I go, I don't think he has any clue what he's doing. Honestly, I think they are completely lost. Clearly, there is a chance if you could do a redo. Now, I know Richardson's banged up, but there's no disputing the two players. And CJ Stroud in a different universe than Bryce Young. So if I was a Carolina Panthers fan, I wouldn't just be nervous because, listen, you take the wrong quarterback, it sets you back. It just does. Most teams are not the 49ers where you can trade up, take a guy, and it not impact you. Bryce Young already has more starts than Trey Lance. But if you get the wrong coach, that's what really sets you back. Because within 2 years, you realize we just made a similar mistake. Then you fire him and you start from scratch. And that's kind of what it feels like right now in Carolina. That are we sure that Frank Reich is going to be the long-term solution? Because I sure as hell am not.